Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Forgive me for speaking English instead of Deutsch, but this will be much better for you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Indeed, for me this is a busy day in North Rhine-Westphalia. In the morning I visited the city of Duisburg, and I will come back to that slightly later. But indeed, instead of the micro perspective, this afternoon discussion here will allow me to focus on the macro questions of the European economy and the social dimension of the economic and monetary union. In the last few months, you have seen the European Commission coming forward with a little bit more optimistic language what concerns the economic and financial situation in the European Union. Indeed, since about last summer, we have been experiencing recovery, but exactly the time of the recovery is when we face the risk of complacency, and mistakes can be made. So that's why the right analysis is so important, and to put every small improvement into a broader perspective. Since about the summer of 2012, what we saw in the second half of 2012 was that the financial markets stabilized slowly after the very innovative and courageous interventions of the European Central Bank. The first half of last year, the real economy stabilized, and in the second half of last year, the labor market stabilized in the EU. Unemployment stopped growing. It started to decline also in a few countries where it was not really expected so quickly after the end of the recession. But we also experienced, and this is probably even more important now than the very high level of average unemployment, increasing divergence in the European Union and especially inside the euro area. Your country, Germany, has been on the stronger side of this. There is no doubt about this. Germany has been standing out with relatively high levels of employment and relatively low levels of unemployment as compared to the EU average and also the Eurozone average. But we never thought that Germany has the solution to everything what concerns the labor market. Problems like a too high share of atypical employment have been observed. The share of this went up from just under 20% in 2000 to over 25% in 2011 before falling just slightly in 2012. We also paid attention to issues like an emerging segmentation of the labor market due to the so-called mini-jobs, and also we have been advocating in the recent years the introduction of a general minimum wage for many reasons. But let me start my presentation with explaining a little bit deeper the divergence in the Eurozone, because this is really going into the heart of the problem. I would like to discuss today the social dimension of the EMU. This slide actually illustrates this divergence in terms of economic growth and unemployment, which affects the Eurozone in particular. It reveals signs of a growing imbalance that built up already before the financial crisis, but which contributed to the post-2008 divergence in particular. The left-hand chart shows that the long-term trend towards convergence in GDP per capita, which was evident in the first decade since the euro's introduction, from about 1999 to 2007, appears to have stopped and even, to some extent, been reversed. This is reflected in the substantial divergence, which actually started around 2005 in GDP per capita between northern and southern euro area member states during the crisis. And similarly, the right-hand chart shows convergence in the development of unemployment up until 2007, followed by tremendous divergence in the so-called euro area member states since 2008. In case it's not perfectly visible, the point is that there is a differentiation between what we call the core and the periphery inside the Eurozone. You often, of course, hear the expression north and south, which is not entirely precise, because relatively northern countries like Ireland, for example, also belong to the periphery. So it's more accurate to speak about a Eurozone periphery, which includes not only the southern European member states, but also countries like Ireland, Slovakia, Slovenia, and the Baltic states, which slowly also are joining the Eurozone. Now, the developments of some key social indicators beyond unemployment, such as household income and poverty in the member states, also show similar divergences. The next slide, therefore, illustrates the importance of the household perspective, since the development of aggregate EU GDP and gross disposable household income has been very different since 2005. It shows that household income may be a better indicator of people's well-being than the GDP as such, because GDP growth does not sufficiently capture the change in material well-being of the households. The third slide, in some detail, shows that the income distribution within the countries also matters, and not just the development of the aggregate household income. It shows the development of the index of the median income by quintiles in selected member states over the period 2004 to 10, with 2004 used as a base year. What we see, if you can see, hopefully, is the different patterns in various member states. For example, in Austria, which is the top left, the growth in the median income is broadly similar across the quintiles. In others, such as Germany, the growth in median income of the bottom quintile is lower than in other quintiles. And in Spain, the income in the bottom quintile rose more before the crisis, but fell much sharper after the crisis began. The development of income in different parts of the income distribution, and especially the lowest income quintile, therefore needs very close monitoring. This brings me to the problem of growing poverty, including inward poverty in EU member states. Across the EU, there are currently about 26.5 million unemployed people, and as we saw, household income is falling still in many member states. In 2012, 25% of the EU population, over 124 million altogether, were at risk of poverty or social exclusion. That means about 6 million more than in 2010, when our Europe 2020 strategy was developed, including a target for reducing poverty and social exclusion by at least 20 million people. Here in Germany, the percentage of people living in poverty or social exclusion is significantly below the average for the EU of 27, but it is still only just under 20% and involves over 16 million people. The rate of jobless households in Germany, which is one of the three key poverty indicators, is over 11%, which is above the EU 27 average, which is 10%. And over the last decade, the poverty rate and inequality in income distribution have increased sharply in this country and are now close to the EU average. So here in Germany, and even more so in other parts of the EU, it raises the question of how effective our social protection systems still are. The next graph gives the percentage of 18 to 59-year-olds living in jobless and poor households and receiving less than 10% of their annual income from social transfers, such as unemployment benefit, social benefit, pensions received by those aged 18 to 59 or housing benefit. It shows that a significant section of the population in need is not covered by standard safety nets, which provide such benefits as unemployment benefit and social welfare assistance. The country with the most extreme situation, probably not surprisingly on the right, is Greece. EL in Brussels language is a reference to Greece, Elada. And here we are concerned with those living in jobless households, that is, when no member of the household is in employment. And these prime working age adults tend to rely on family support, for example, the pensions of the elderly household members, or on informal work. Such a situation is not conducive to getting the people involved back to employment, because there is no associated incentive such as activation measures. Ladies and gentlemen, these slides, which have been just some highlights from our recent Employment and Social Development report, which was published a few weeks ago in Brussels about the last year, demonstrate the very serious and indeed increasing imbalances, social imbalances within the member states, but particularly between the various parts of the euro area. Such developments generate economic and social spillovers for the Economic and Monetary Union and undermine economic stability as well. Clearly, with low aggregate growth and unprecedented socio-economic divergence between the member states, the euro area is facing both a systemic and an economic crisis. Tackling euro area divergence means ensuring the EMU takes greater account of social and employment developments in order to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth. So last October, the European Commission adopted proposals on strengthening the social dimension of the EMU as part of the ongoing work to reconstruct the Economic and Monetary Union and to make it deep, genuine, and sustainable. This communication identified 3 strands for action. The first strand entails a closer surveillance of employment and social developments in the member states and closer EU employment and social policy coordination by means of a new scoreboard. This would allow for the early identification of major negative developments in the member states' employment and social performance and any significant divergence between countries within the currency union. The scoreboard results give focus to closer multilateral surveillance of the member states' performance. Together with labor mobility and effective matching of labor supply and demand across the union, the second strand involves enhanced solidarity. The Commission has also given thought to establishing a certain fiscal capacity linked to close coordination mechanisms in the euro area. I am referring in particular to the possibility of closer coordination of member states' reforms through so-called contractual arrangements and a related convergence and competitiveness instrument. In the longer term, the Commission communication on strengthening the social dimension of the EMU also mentions the possibility of an autonomous euro area budget with a fiscal capacity that would provide for EMU-level stabilization tools, such as an unemployment benefit scheme for the EMU itself. There is, in my view, a growing consensus on the need for automatic supranational stabilizers in the Economic and Monetary Union. That is probably a longer-term project, but we are continuing our research and analytical work in order to feed into the discussions once the political momentum arrives. Now, the third strand of this communication calls for closer social partner involvement in economic governance of the Economic and Monetary Union. The Commission is mindful of the social partners' very important contribution to policy effectiveness. Our proposals seek to involve the social partners more closely in EU economic governance to help shape reforms and contribute to policy responses. The challenge now is to work within the current treaties and present governance arrangements to get the European Union, and in particular the euro area, back on track to economic and social convergence. Ladies and gentlemen, our communication on the social dimension of the EMU also highlights the importance of labor mobility. Free movement is a fundamental right of citizens, and labor mobility is an asset for the economy. Labor mobility alone, however, will not resolve the imbalances in the Eurozone, but it is definitely a part of the solution. Despite widespread unemployment, there are member states and regions where jobs cannot be filled for a lack of suitable candidates. A recent report shows that close to 2 million vacancies across the EU are unfilled today. And with more than 26 million jobless, it simply makes no sense to allow these vacancies to remain unfilled. So we have adopted a new proposal in January for a regulation on the European Network of Employment Services, which is called EURES. It seeks to improve access to mobility services and promote greater integration of the EU labour market. And moreover, the European Parliament and the Council concluded a major agreement just before Christmas on the proposal for a directive on measures facilitating the exercise of the rights of the free movement of workers. An overwhelming majority of the members of the European Parliament voted in favour of a resolution strongly supporting free movement on the 16th of January. This period is also crucial for reaching agreement between the Council and the European Parliament on the enforcement directive on the posting of workers. This directive would increase the possibility of fighting against social dumping and provide the necessary safeguards for the freedom to provide services. Its adoption before the European elections would indeed send a very strong signal of the EU's capacity to address social questions. Ladies and gentlemen, when presenting the last slide on the standard safety nets, I already referred to the need to closely scrutinize the performance of our social protection systems. Inadequate social protection and low investment in education or training in some member states can have major implications in terms of increased poverty and a lower skilled workforce, which can affect overall economic competitiveness. And conversely, effective social spending can help cushion the impact of economic downturns by stabilizing household income, supporting human capital development, and helping to combat poverty and exclusion across Europe. This has been the approach taken by our social investment package 1 year ago, which sets out policy guidance to help the member states reform their social protection systems and makes the point that social spending is largely an investment in the future rather than a remedial spending. Top among the EU financial instruments for implementing social policy reform and supporting the implementation of the social investment package is the European Social Fund. The Commission recently finalized its operational guidance on using the fund better to support social investment in the 4 investment priority areas: promoting employment, investing in education, combating poverty, and enhancing institutional capacity. The European Fund for Aid to the Most Deprived will also provide assistance to those needing urgent support by providing, for example, homeless people and materially deprived children in particular with food, clothing, and other essential goods. And let me mention another financial instrument, which we call the Programme for Employment and Social Innovation. This will support the development and coordination of social investment policy, the sharing of best practices, capacity building, and the testing of social innovations with a view to upscaling the most successful ones. Ladies and gentlemen, let me finally say a few words about North Rhine-Westphalia itself, also in the light of my presentation. This land, which is your land, has seen almost continuous immigration ever since industrialization began. People have come from other parts of Europe looking for work and a better life. Here in the so-called Ruhrgebiet, immigration is also vital in compensating for the decline of the population. And the last few years have seen an increase in particular from 2 new EU member states, Romania and Bulgaria. The fall of the Iron Curtain, and in particular the lifting of visa requirements, has triggered an increase in immigration, which has grown sharper in the recent years. Until the economic situation significantly improves in the countries of emigration, I believe this is likely to continue. But I see no serious risk of a sharp increase simply in the context of the end of the transitional arrangements restricting free movement of workers from Bulgaria and Romania. Of course, total immigration figures are not the only factor, as recent arrivals tend to concentrate in a few big cities. So we have to pay attention to the specific challenges of the municipalities where a larger number of migrants actually concentrate. And in this area, obviously, this can upset the local balances in the solidarity system of certain cities. I was, as I said in introduction, in Duisburg this morning and heard about the situation there. Most Romanians and Bulgarians who come to Germany are actually highly skilled and qualified, and they come here because of a job offer or because they have good qualifications and good prospects of finding a job. They also pay into the social security system. Another smaller group of poorly trained and sometimes illiterate people are attracted by what often turns out to have been false promises. In quite a number of cases, they are exploited and live in dreadful conditions. The only way they can pay their debts is to work on the undeclared labor market. Immigrants coming to Germany to look for work often lack basic information about working life in this country. This explains why they fall victim to exploitation too easily. They work more hours than the legal limit, are paid less than the standard, and know little about the rights and duties. While the concerned employers are, of course, the first that need to change the treatment of those workers, I also encourage trade unions to help inform such groups and ensure they are properly treated. The Member States can use the European Social Fund resources to co-finance projects addressing social and employment challenges. The program for North Rhine-Westphalia is well adapted to people coming from other EU member states. People from Romania and Bulgaria can take part in projects if they belong to the target groups, such as children at risk of leaving school early and long-term unemployed people who face a combination of problems in getting into the labour market. The amounts available are significant. North Rhine-Westphalia has ESF funds worth 684 million euros. Coupled with German co-financing, this gives a total budget over 1.3 billion euros. Recent press articles have claimed wrongly that a large amount of ESF resources would be unspent in Germany. Projects for the programming period ending in 2013 can actually continue to be financed until 2015, and we expect that close on 100% will be spent by then. We are currently discussing the focus of the ESF program for the coming 7 years with our colleagues in North Rhine-Westphalia, and I'm confident that this land will continue to help improve the labour market and the social situation of people here, whatever their background. Ladies and gentlemen, prior to what we must now call the Great Recession, most social and employment performance indicators were converging across the EU. But since 2008, the gap has been widening. Even the more resilient member states are affected by spillover effects through a fall in demand and the erosion of confidence. The current trend towards divergence among the member states in the euro area is fraught with danger. The first version of the scoreboard of key social and employment indicators approved by the December European Council shows how divergence has built up across the Union, and in particular in the Eurozone. This divergence is clearly visible in the unemployment rate of young people, and especially in the percentage of young people neither in employment nor in education or training, the so-called NEETs. With the Youth Guarantee currently being set up in all EU member states, we try to address this situation. There is also more divergence within the euro area than outside in terms of household income and inequality. Poverty rates have gone up in the euro area periphery, but have remained steady in the core countries. The scoreboard shows varying developments in employment and social areas, including rising unemployment and youth unemployment rates and declining rates of real growth in gross household disposable income. High unemployment, severe inequality, or high risk of poverty translate into lower demand for products from other countries and into a loss or deterioration of human capital, which undermines the future productivity of the European Union as a whole. These phenomena have indeed potentially dire consequences for our entire labour market, our human capital base, and altogether for the member states' economies. They can also have serious consequences politically. In the very bleak economic and social climate which I have painted, acceptance of extremist political views is growing, and minorities are bearing the brunt of the reaction. Misleading messages on the free movement of workers are stoking simplistic arguments and fueling populistic responses. The forthcoming European Parliament elections will be, in my view, a test of Europeans' reaction to all these messages. It is in all our interests to work for a strong pro-European response, both in the elections and in our policy work beforehand. Tackling the divergence in the euro area is therefore a crucial plank in that response. Thank you very much for your attention.